Hello, my name is Edna Jaramillo and today I'm going to talk about my fictional hypothetical problem that I would have if I were doing my practices right now, but I'm not. So the first video is about the theoretical guidelines. So first I'm going to talk about the school that I'm in, that it was the Nazareth High School and Elementary School. And the Nazareth School is a private school. It's a religious school in Tuluá Valle, and it provides classes from 1st to 11th grade in the morning routine. The school is wealthy and it's big, consisting on 2 floors and comfortable classrooms, as I told you before. Each one with a video beam, which results very useful for the teaching processes. And they teach according to the LOVE methodology. And the assigned English teacher for the 6th grade to 8th grade is called Oscar Marino, and the methodology he used was the communicative approach. The communicative approach came from the need of communication skills in English, which created a huge demand for the English language all around the world. And millions of people today want to improve the command of English, whether it is them or their children or people in their family. And there are a lot of opportunities of learning English, which are to study abroad, through the media and the internet, and traveling. So there's a worldwide demand for the English language learning, and this is where the communicative approach came from. They want to be able to master the English language, not only people in the common but also employees, and fluency in English is a prerequisite for people sometimes to acquire their jobs. So the demand of the English language is as strong as ever. The communicative method is a method that is very popular these days. Perhaps while asking English teachers what's their favorite methodology or the methodology they implement, they're going to answer that they use the communicative approach as their methodology of choice. However, there are a lot of ways that the communicative approach can be presented, and there's a big question around this, around what does it mean, whether it means teaching conversation, the absence of grammar, or an emphasis on an open-ended discussion activities as the main features of a course. So they are very different ways, a lot of different ways to understand the communicative language teaching, which is where we're going to talk about today. Now, moving on, communicative competence includes the following aspects of language knowledge. Knowing how to use language for a range of different purposes and functions, knowing how to vary or use of language according to the setting and the participants. For example, how to use formal and informal speech, and when to use language appropriately for reading as opposed to spoken communication, since the two of them are different. Knowing how to produce and understand different types of text, narratives, reports, interviews, or conversations. Knowing how to maintain communication despite having limitations in one's language knowledge, through using different kinds of communication strategies. The way that we learn and teach a language has considerably changed throughout the years. For example, at first people thought that there was only the capacity to learn through the grammatical competence, and language learning was viewed as a process of mechanical habit formation. So good habits are formed while having students produce correct sentences and not through making mistakes. Errors were to be avoided through control opportunities for production, either written or spoken, by memorizing dialogues and performing drills. The chances of making mistakes were minimized, and learning was very much seen as under control of the teacher. In recent years, however, this has changed, and now we take some things into account, such as the interaction between the learner and the language, the collaborative creation of meaning, the creating meaningful and purposeful interaction through language, negotiation of meaning as the learner and his or her interlocutor arrive at understanding, learning through attending to the feedback learners get when they use the language, paying attention to the language that one hears, which is the input, and trying to incorporate new forms into one's developing communicative competences, trying out and experimenting with different ways of saying things. More less, so less than being a robot that repeats stuff, and more like being a participant in a language. So what are the roles of the learners and the teaching in the communicative approach? The type of classroom activities that CLT proposed also implied certain new roles for the teacher and the learner. So learners now had to participate in the classroom activities that were based on a cooperative rather than an individualistic approach to learning. Students had become comfortable with listening to their peers in group work or pair work tasks rather than relying on the teacher. So they now have a bigger role of responsibility for their own learning, and it's not all according to the teacher. And teachers now have to assume the role of facilitator and monitor rather than being a model for correct speech and writing in for one of the primary responsibility of making students produce plenty of error-free sentences. So the teacher is now more like a guide than a dictator who just wants to see things being a certain way and there no other way. Okay, so the way that we teach a language and we learn a language has changed in the last 15 years, making us divide them into 3 phases. The first phase is the traditional approaches such as the audiolinguism and the structural situational approach. And the phase 2 is the classic communicative language teaching, which went from the 70s to the 90s, and now is the current communicative language teaching from the late 90s to the present. Okay, so the classroom activities in the communicative approach, there is accuracy versus fluency activities, because one of the goals of CLT is to develop fluency in language use. Fluency is a natural language use occurring when a speaker engages in a meaningful interaction and maintains comprehensible and outgoing communication despite limitation in his or her communicative competence. Fluency is developing by creating classroom activities in which students will negotiate meaning and use communication strategies, correct misunderstandings, and work to avoid communication breakdowns. Fluency practice can be contrasted with accuracy practices, which focuses on creating correct examples of language use. Okay, now we're going to see examples of each one of them. An example of a fluency task will be a group of students of mixed language ability carry out a role play in which they have to adopt specific roles and personalities provided for them on cue cards. These roles involve the drivers, witnesses, and the police at a collision between 2 cars. The language is entirely improvised by the student. It is an improv activity. The teacher and a student act out a dialogue in which a customer returns a faulty object she has purchased to the department store. The clerk asks what the problem is and promises to get a refund for the customer or replace the item. In groups, students now try to recreate the dialogue using language item of their choice. They are asked to recreate what happened, preserving the meaning but not necessarily the exact language. The actor act out their dialogues in front of the classes. As you can see, this is more of a real world situation, so the point is that they know how to manage themselves and their fluency of the language and avoid having communication breakdowns. Then an example of the accuracy task will be student practicing dialogues, and the dialogues can contain examples of falling intonation and WH questions. The class is organized in groups of 3, 2 students practicing the dialogue, and the third one is playing the role of the monitor. The monitor checks that the others are using the correct intonation pattern and corrects them if it's necessary. The students then rotate the roles between those reading the dialogue and those monitoring. The teacher moves around listening to the groups and correcting their language where is necessary. Students in group of 3 or 4 compete an exercise of grammatical items such as choosing between the past tense and the present perfect, an item where the teacher has previously presented and practiced as a whole class activity, of course with a previous show of the teacher explaining this topic. Together, students decide which grammatical form is correct and they complete the exercise. Groups take turn in reading out their answers. Okay, so emphasis on pair and group work. As we've seen before on the examples that CLT tasks may have, so we can see that there are a lot of activities that are designed to be carried out in pairs or small groups. Completing activities in this way, learners will obtain several benefits. They can learn from hearing the language used by other members of the group. They will produce a greater amount of language that they will use in teacher-fronted activities. Their motivational level is likely to increase since they will have the chance to develop fluency. Teaching and classroom materials today consequently make use of wide variety of small groups activities. Jacobs and Farrell suggest that the CLT paradigm shifts online above shift. Jacobs and Farrell suggest that the CLT paradigm online above has led to 8 major changes in approaches to language teaching. These changes are: the first one is learner autonomy by since by giving learners greater choice over their own learning, both in terms of the content of learning as well as processes they might employ. The use of small groups is one example of this, as well as the use of self-assessment. The second one is the social nature of learning. Learning is not an individual private activity, but a social one that depends upon interaction with others. And the movement known as comparative learning reflects this viewpoint. The third one is curricular integration. The connection between different strands of the curriculum is emphasized so that in English is not seen as a standalone subject but is linked to other subjects in the curriculum. The fourth one is focus on meaning. Meaning is viewed as the driving force of learning. Content-based teaching reflects this view and seeks to make the exploration of meaning through content the core of language learning activities. The fifth one is diversity. Learners learn in different ways and have different strengths. Teaching needs to take these differences into account rather than try to force students into a single mold. The sixth one are the teaching skills. Language should serve as means of developing higher order thinking skills, also known as critical and creative thinking. So in language teaching, this means that students do not learn language for their own sake, but in order to develop and apply their thinking skills in situations that go beyond the language classroom, so they can use it outside the academic environment. The seventh one is the alternative assessments. New forms of assessments are needed to replace the traditional multiple choice and other items that test lower order skills. Multiple forms of assessment, as for example observation, interview, journal, or portfolios, can be used to build a comprehensive picture of what students can do in a second language. And the last one is the teachers as co-learners. The teacher is viewed as a facilitator who is constantly trying out new different alternatives, for instance, learning through doing. In language teaching, this has led to an interest in action research and other forms of classroom investigation. I was lucky to find the methodology that I use for my classes in the same document, which is the task-based learning or the task-based instruction. So the task-based instruction is another methodology that can be regarded as developing from a focus on classroom processes. The claim is that language teaching will result from creating the right kinds of interactional processes in the classroom, and the best way to create this is to use a specially designed instructional task rather than employ a conventional syllabus, particularly a grammar-based one. Advocates that TBI argue that grammar and other dimensions of communicative competence can be developed as a byproduct of engaging learners of interactive tasks. Of course, most learners make use of different kinds of tasks as a part of their regular teaching, but task-based instruction, however, is different because it makes strong claims for the use of tasks and sees them as the primary unit to be used, both in planning teaching, which is developing a syllabus, and also in classroom teaching. But what exactly is a task? So basically what a task is, it is something that learners do or carry out using their existing language resources. It has an outcome which is not simply linked to learning language through a language acquisition may occur as the learner carries out this task. It involves a focus on meaning, and there are two kinds of tasks that are mentioned in this document, which are the pedagogical task and the real-world task. The pedagogical tasks are specially designed classroom tasks that are intended to require the use of specific interactional strategies that may also require the use of specific types of language, which are skills, grammar, vocabulary. A task in which two learners have to try to find the number of difference between two similar pictures will be an example of a pedagogical task. And then we have the real-world tasks, which are tasks that reflect on the real-world use of the language, which might be considered as a rehearsal for a real-world situation. A role play in which students practice a job interview will be an example of this kind of task. But then Willis in 1996 proposed 6 types of tasks as the basis of task-based instruction or learning. The first one will be a listing task. For example, that students might have to make up a list of things they will pack if they were going on a beach vacation. The second one is sorting and ordering. Students work in pairs and make up a list of the more important characteristics of their ideal vacation. The third one is comparing. Students compare ads from 2 different supermarkets. The fourth one is problem solving, in which students can read a letter to advise a columnist and suggest a solution to the writer's problems. The fifth one will be sharing personal experience, in which students discuss their reactions to an ethical or moral dilemma. And the sixth one is creative task, in which students prepare plans for redecorating a house. Of course, there are a lot of other ways of tasks that can be presented in the task-based learning, and many classroom activities do not share the characteristics of the class that I mentioned before, because every single teacher and their situation in the classroom is different. To finish for today, I would like to refer to the British Council website and how they define task-based learning. And they divide this task-based approach, and it says that the lesson follows certain stages. The first one is the pre-task, in which the teacher introduces the topic and gives the students clear introductions on what they will have to do as the task stage, and might help the students to recall some language that may be useful for the task. The pre-task stage can also often include a plain recording of people doing the task. This gives the students a clear model of what will be expected of them and what they have to do. The students can take notes and spend some time preparing for the task. Then there is the task part, which the students complete a task in pair or groups using the language resources that they have, as the teacher monitors and offers encouragement. Then there is the planning, in which students prepare a short oral or written report to tell the class what happens during their task. They then practice what they are going to say in their groups. Meanwhile, the teacher is available for the students to ask for advice or to clear up any doubts. Then there is the report part, in which the students report back to the class orally or with the written report. The teacher chooses the order of when the students will present the reports and may give the students some quick feedback on the content. At this stage, the teacher may also play a recording of others doing the same task for the students to compare. The analysis part, in which the teacher then highlights the relevant parts from the text or the recording for the students to analyze. They may ask students to notice interesting features within the text, and the teachers can also highlight the language that the student used during the report for the phase of analysis. Then there is the practice part, in which finally the teacher selects language areas to practice based upon the needs of the students and what emerge from the task and report phases. The students then do a practice activities to increase their confidence and make a note of their useful language. So this will be all for today. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!